can build some bots. So let's make sure, and if you remember anything from this call, as we do the work we're doing to rise as entrepreneurs and as technology innovators and contributors to this movement that exists in the Valley, but that also exists in so many other parts of the world, let's remember to hold on to our sense of wonder and our sense of love, not only for each other, but for this world that we all occupy together. Because as we all know, this world is facing problems, and the people in it are facing problems that can't be answered with a new food delivery app or something like that. It's not that there's anything wrong with a new food delivery app, but let's remember to care about this place that we live in and the people who occupy it, because that is really where our ability to change the world exists. So before I continue with that, I'd love to hear through chat if anyone heard me loud and clear with that message and will remember to hang on to it as we have our conversation today. Did that make sense to you? I'm watching eagerly. Yes, ma'am. Good. That's a great answer. Especially you're dialing in from India, a country with a deep and rich tradition of an understanding of consciousness and the integrated intelligence. Oh, I love your comments. Thank you so much. The integrated intelligence that we humans hold. And one of the things that we've forgotten here in the Valley is that we are more than our brains, more than our minds. Now, I work in the area these days of cognitive neuroscience. So I look at the crossroads of cognitive neuroscience, design thinking, the design process, and then wisdom practices. My focus is primarily on Buddhist wisdom and the parallels between the Buddhist teaching, and what we're exploring these days in neuroscience, quantum mechanics, and many other disciplines of the cognitive and physical sciences. And one of the things that we remember is we optimize more and more for the data sets that are shaping our world. We have to remember that we're more than the data sets. We have our highest human cognition right here in the front of the brain, where we have our ability to do things like critical thought, priority balancing, empathy for other people, really getting out of our blind spots and assumption sets and caring for other people. And there is something in the convergence of those disciplines, the neuroscience, the wisdom practices, and the design thinking, that is really what I want to work on for the rest of my life. There's something there that is beyond the data-driven construct or framework that we tend to focus on in the Valley now. And this is about moving us from the work of innovation and back into the wonder of innovation. And in the teaching that I do, we realize that can sometimes be an unlearning process. It's going back to the childhood curiosity that is our gift, our birthright that we were all born with, and really finding ways to use our technology training along with our human drive to make a positive difference, to innovate in a different way. In short, to think different. A phrase that you are all familiar with. And in a moment, we're going to talk about something called the path to thinking different. And I'd love to share with you some stories of how that came about, what I learned from it, and why my work to try to understand what made Steve Jobs, so profoundly change the way I think, work, and view my purpose in life. And I hope it will also have an influence on you. But beforehand, I'd like to do something fun with all of you. And unfortunately, I can't see you, but I'm going to trust that you all are going to do it. Hold up your fingers like this, about this far in front of your eyes as you kind of have it. Touch them together, and then don't look exactly at them, but look beyond them. Look slightly beyond them and move them around in your field of vision until you see if maybe there's a little optical effect that happens. Some of you might be seeing an illusion. You might be seeing floating between your two fingers a little thing that looks like a mini finger. I like to call it a floating sausage finger. It's just a little thing floating in the air. And you can stop doing it whether you saw it or not. Try it later, but if you saw it, give me a yes in the chat. What's happened there is the brain has done its job absolutely perfectly. And what it's done is it's sampled a set of your physical reality at this time. It's brought that information in through the sense doors of your eyes, and it's projected onto them an image in your brain. It's allowed you to construct a visual image. But what it's done is, because you have an ocular blind spot right here, we all have it. What it's done is, in its sampling, it's assembled its best guess, its best hypothesis of what's happening in the physical world. And it's told you, I can show you what's real. You have a floating sausage finger. But we don't have a floating sausage finger. It's an optical illusion. It's the product of a blind spot. So I want you to remember too from this talk that as we speak today, we and our assumptions and even our conditioning, our learning, everything we learn in school teaches us blind spots as much as it teaches us what is real, what we choose to see as real. And what the brain does is when we eliminate certain things from our vision set, it recodes itself and it rewires itself to say, this is real and this is what I'm going to let you see going forward. And anything that, anything that doesn't align with my hypothesis or our construct of what is real, I'm going to tell you is fake, or I'm not going to let you see it. And one of the things in Steve Jobs' vision and his genius was he was able to challenge to a very large extent his own blind spots. And he was able to get out of the traditional construct of what was real and into a fuller understanding of what was possible, what was happening, and what he could change in this world. Now, the main way people talk about him doing that, of course, is through his drug experiments and his use of LSD. Many of you have probably heard there's been almost a renaissance of LSD use here in the Valley. People are microdosing, using it, and going on transcendent experiences to try to come back with a little bit more of that genius than they had on this plane. I know a lot of people do it, and it's always a controversial topic when I talk about it. I'll be honest with you, I have been asked even when I'm teaching if I microdose. And the answer is no, I don't. But all of this is available to us if we simply understand that what a transcendent experience or a psychedelic experience is doing is allowing us to remove some of our conditioned filters that construct our view of reality and the way that we interpret it. And we can also remove those filters in other ways, through intentionality, through challenging our assumptions, through asking about our blind spots, through meditation. Many people do it. I actually find meditation a really powerful way to do it. And then also by wanting to do it, by simply wanting to do it, by being willing to think different and ask what else might be happening in this moment, in this world, than what is immediately available to me. What else might be happening besides this floating sausage finger? It's simply a brain-driven construct of my blind spots. So I really want you to think about that as we step into this conversation. I want to begin with a story about this story, about how I wrote The Path to Thinking Different. So shortly after Steve died, I had a very challenging experience in my professional life. I had joined a Silicon Valley venture capital firm and intended to stay there for the next 10 years, really if you will, the final chapter of my career. I was thrilled beyond words. I was proud. I felt a lot of sort of ego and pride in it. Within 3 months of my joining the firm, something happened that was not in my comfort zone. It was not something that I wanted to participate in and be a part with. And I made the very truly painful decision, really gut-wrenching decision, to leave the firm. And it was one of the hardest chapters of certainly the hardest chapter of my career, definitely one of the hardest chapters of my entire life. And when I left, it was not that long after Steve had died. And I started asking myself, what did I miss? Where did I go wrong? What was in my blind spots that caused me to make a decision that went so badly? And in order to find out, I started deeply asking the question, what made Steve Steve? Why was he so good at casting his path and living in alignment with his truest intention? And what did I miss from that? What can I learn from that might be useful to others? So over the course of that next year, as I sort of got back into being self-employed and starting a consulting practice and working very hard to sort of get back on track with the things that I really wanted to do with my life, I began researching Steve and wanted to come up with 10 things that made Steve Steve. I almost saw it as 10 lines of code that any of us could learn to say we can think more like him. And that path brought me to some very interesting places that I hadn't experienced. And one of them was to this concept that I write about in the Path to Thinking Different. My first step was to read a book many of you have heard about. It's called Autobiography of a Yogi. And my blind spots and assumptions really kicked back on me at that as I read about the things about bilocation, travel through time, being in two places at one time, things that this mystic said were part of his spiritual tradition. And of course, myself, having a background in science and technology, I challenged it and I went, oh, these are nice stories, but I didn't give it credence. But the more I read about this work and the more I looked at Steve's response to it, the gurus who had been involved in this practice, the more my blind spot began to open up and I began to say to myself, perhaps there's more to this than my Western trained mind has allowed me to consider. Perhaps I've lost my sense of wonder and sacrificed it or traded it for my more robotic way of working, thinking in lines of code or thinking in mathematical formulas or spreadsheets. And so I began inquiring further and I began interviewing people who had known Steve early in his life and as he was growing up. And one of the things that I learned about Steve is from the time he was a really young guy, and you can read this in many places, he felt he had been set apart and he felt he was different. And being adopted had a lot to do with this. Living a little bit differently than many people in Silicon Valley did. I grew up in a very similar neighborhood to Steve's, a little bit different, a little bit farther away, and only a few years later. But if Steve's experience was like mine, and from his stories it was, he saw all around him being a, kind of moderate, hardworking middle-class family surrounded by people who knew technology and were working for tech companies whose wealth was suddenly growing very quickly. And so there was a part of him that felt very different culturally, socially. His somewhat awkward social skills also marked him apart. And so he grew up with this sense of being different. And, as Spider-Man movie says, with great power comes great responsibility. He felt power in that being set apart, but he also felt different. But now I want to remind all of you, and I want to really ask this as a question. I'd love to see your honest responses, yeses or nos. Who on this call has not felt at some point in their early childhood that they were different, that they were set apart, that they had a special gift inside themselves that was uniquely theirs, like a secret that nobody else knew about them, and that was part of their dharma or their duty or their purpose in life? So one of the differences, and the first one to remember between Steve and most of us, is we have all hidden that because we feel that that's our crazy part, like that thing that sets us apart that makes us a little bit weird. Steve embraced that. He looked at it as that thing that set him apart, that made him more powerful and more responsible and had more duty and more urgency and more call to make a change in this lifetime. Who on the call has felt inside that, even thinking back to childhood, that they had something inside them that was special, that was a call to purpose or to action? I certainly did as a child. I ask the question all the time, why am I here? Why does this matter? What am I here to do? Well, one of the big differences between Steve and many others is Steve simply never stopped believing that, right? He never traded that for social acceptance or for fitting in with the culture or for being like all of the other kids. He made a commitment early in his life and he stuck with it to setting himself apart and being different. And that was part of his power. Now, one of the things that happened to me as I was writing, by the way, I didn't see any responses, so can I get a hello? Are you all still there? Is this call still working and you guys can still hear me? I'm talking into the dark here, so I want to make sure. Excellent, super. I want to tell you a story about something happened when I decided to write this article about Steve. And I actually started writing a book about this. I did write a book about it. It was turned down by a publisher. I may revive it at some point, but I would make some changes. I've learned a lot since I wrote it. But this is a great story from Silicon Valley and sort of shows the way the world works, and I think you'll love it. On one morning that I was deep into my inquiry about what made Steve Jobs different, what made Steve Steve, I was down in Palo Alto near Stanford, and I had recently finished reading a book it's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I hope some of you have read it. It's an amazing book. And I read it, or I tried to read it when I was much, much younger, and I couldn't finish it, and I certainly didn't enjoy it. But about 5 years ago when I read it, it blew my mind, and it really changed. It kind of gave me a new way to look at the world and to look at the path to creating not only excellence in products, but excellence in our life experience. And it is the book that is at the cornerstone of my teaching at Stanford. It doesn't often come up in it, but it really provides the framework that I teach from, kind of softening the lines between the mystic and the known, between beauty and technology, really integrating integrating the, oh, by the way, someone said to me, read the autobiography of Steve Jobs. You know, I've read it too. And some of it is good and some of it is quite inaccurate. So that's another conversation. But if you really, really want to read a great book about Steve Jobs, the one that I recommend is called Becoming Steve Jobs. It is absolutely dazzling, and it looks at a fascinating time in his life where he really matured into leadership from the time he returned from Next to his death, but through all of the time that he rebuilt Apple on this new paradigm that really did change the world in such a powerful way. And when he was his truest expression of Steve, his most powerful and luminous Steve, which is great. And by the way, another time we'll talk about this, but he was absolutely not a jerk. But that's kind of one of the things that we'll get to. He was a fantastic person and still someone who inspires me every day. So, but anyway, there I was in Palo Alto thinking about this book that I'd finished reading called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I was saying to myself, Steve had to have read it. I know he read it, but I couldn't find in any mentions of his book lists or, you know, anything that he'd ever referenced when he talked about his reading. No mention of it. So this is on one day. It was a Tuesday. So on Monday, I was thinking about this. So Monday, I said, one of my goals, one of my intentions for this week is by the end of this week, I want to find a person who can definitively answer the question, did Steve Jobs read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? And I thought, you know, maybe I can call a one-time shot and get it from someone, you know, really close to him, someone, you know, I live in this community, I know people and knew Steve's family and all of this. So I thought, you know, maybe I can find a way to find out from someone very close to home if he had read it or not. So Monday, my goal was, I'm going to know who to ask by the end of this week. Tuesday, I went down to Palo Alto, and I went to my favorite little place where I sip coffee and work in the morning. And I'm sitting there on this sunny Tuesday morning. Just 1 minute. Sorry, I have a friend pinging me on messages, so I'm going to shut it off. I beg your pardon. I went down to this coffee shop. I'm sipping my coffee, sitting in the sun, and on my mind is the question, who will I ask? And at that moment, Dan Kotke walks by. Now, Dan Kotke is, you know, I hadn't seen him in years. And Dan was Steve's friend and acid tripping partner and Indian travel companion back in the day. And I thought, unbelievable. If this isn't evidence of sort of believing in this think different thing and sort of setting intentions and waiting for then the universes, you know, parallel many universes to come and give you exactly what you're asking for, this is a sign, right? So I walked up to Dan and I said, Dan, you know, great to see you. How are you? We chit-chatted for a moment. I go, by the way, do you happen to know if Steve ever read the book, you know, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? And I still remember Dan, he goes, Robert Pirsig, yes, what a classic. I've read that many times. He goes, but you know, if it came out after Steve and I were friends, we were no longer friends. So if he read it, I wouldn't know about it. But yeah, it kind of seems like something he would have read. So I thought, and I go, do you know anyone else who might know? And he goes, well, no, I don't know anyone else, but let me think about it. I'll get you back to you by the end of the week. So I'm like, I'm on the path. This is so great. Well, that afternoon I had a meeting down at Apple. Really cool meeting. And I was waiting in the lobby. I got there, of course, a little bit early, and I'm waiting in the lobby. And lo and behold, as I'm sitting there in the lobby, just enjoying being in the Apple lobby, in walks someone who I had worked with at Apple many, many years ago. I hadn't seen him in 10 or 12 years, and who had come back to Apple, specifically called back by Steve, and worked with him very closely. So he and I sat down. His name's Michael. I'll leave it at that. We were sitting down, we're chatting, having a great catch up. And finally I said, you know, Michael, I got to tell you, I was talking about teaching. You go, you know, in my teaching, I really refer to this book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I wonder, and he interrupted me, he goes, oh my gosh, Zen, Steve loved that book, quoted it all the time. So I bring this up to tell you, live in wonder, right? And attract wonder to your life by asking for it. Here on a Monday, I said, my only wish is to know who I can ask to find out. You know, I was willing to spend weeks finding out, months finding out, as long as by Friday I had a pathway to finding out. By Tuesday, I had the answer I was looking for and more. And I think there is something, that is worth remembering as we think about the path to thinking different. What more is available to us beyond our blind spots in our consciousness when we return to that wonder that Steve lived in? And he did live in wonder. You could see the joy on his face as he spoke about his products. He let himself love his life and let himself love his experience. And he let himself love the challenge of awakening people from the dream that this small reality we limit ourselves to is all there is. And in a sense, that is how writing The Path to Thinking Different changed me. It made me think that one of my duties in my later life, that one of the gifts that age and wisdom can give us, but if it can give it to us over time, why not speed up that time and take it on a little bit earlier? You know, wisdom shouldn't discriminate. It's an attitude, and it is about collecting the dots and collecting the experiences, but we can collect more of the dots and more of the experiences as we open our eyes and our hearts and our beings to wonder. And all of that fuels our creative process, as it did for Steve. And I made a commitment in studying Steve at that time and in really absorbing the things in the books of consciousness that he read. I bought or borrowed and read many of them to say, open your world and open your eyes to more wonder, and then use what you find to think different. And with that, to contribute more richly, more fully, and more meaningfully to this beautiful life experience we've all been given, into the world that needs our help and our care and our love so much right now. And I believe that is the path to thinking different. So with that, if it's all right with Bharat, I'd love to move to an open conversation. I can stay until about 9:15 my time. So for about 20 more minutes, I'd love to do questions and answers with you. And thank you. Bharat, how are we doing?
Thanks, sir.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Ellen. So we'll open questions now. Guys, any questions? Just put it in Q&A section.
Will people be typing in questions, or how will they come up?
Yeah, they will be typing in. Ellen.
Great, I am ready. I know that we don't have 37 shy people out there. There must be some who have questions. Oh, I see something that says Q&A. Let's see. Oh, what made Steve Jobs a great presenter? Okay, what? Well, you know what? I'm going to tell you. If you want to be a great anything, presenter, designer, friend, visionary, researcher, artist, anything, there is one easy answer. You have to care. You have to care. And going deeply into how you feel about it. And really, as you know, really, it's such a simple word, isn't it, to care? So what Steve cared about, he didn't, he talked about products in a really interesting way. He would say that the product you make is not the product. The product is not the product. The product is the emotional state change that the product delivers, right? So you create a product simply to be a delivery vehicle for an emotional experience. Now think about that in terms of a presenter, right? What made him a great presenter is he knew that the speech was not his product. His speech is not the product. The emotional state change he created with the audience was the product. So how would he use a speech to create an emotional state change? Well, first of all, there has to be engagement, a sense of really connecting with the audience. So using his charisma and his power to connect with people, his presence, which was something he refined. He knew he had a very influential presence. And then also looking at the arc, the story arc that he was going to share, the sense of drama. And by the way, if you want to understand drama, a really good thing to look at is, of course, The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, which looks at the call to action, the resistance of the call, the descent into darkness, the seeking of gifts, and then the return bearing gifts, which I like to say is pretty much the cycle of any good video game, right? But there is that loop you go through where there's some drama and some suspense, and then the return with the gift. So I think what made him a great presenter was, one, he cared deeply. Two, he did not design his presentation. He designed the emotional experience he wanted to give his audience, the awe and wonder. And then three, he used a very powerful drama arc in order to deliver an experience in real time. That was sort of his framework or culture. We have Abel asking, so thank you, Rohit, for your question. Abel, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. It might be Abel. My TED Talk on design thinking. Briefly, I'll talk about design thinking. Design thinking is a framework or a structure that I think what it actually does is remove some of our blind spots, right? It takes away some of the invisible stuff that isn't visible to us and some of the surprises as we design products, experience, or services. And it begins with empathy. We have to really know, understand, and a huge word here, care, C-A-R-E, such a simple word, but you have to really care about the experience, the life experience, emotionally, psychologically, physically, in any other way of the audience you're designing for. So you have to have empathy for your audience, what their real life experience is about. You have to observe them in action and see what it's really like. So empathy, observation. Then what you do after deep observation and empathy, you've taken information from the outside world. You must balance it then with your own internal experience. This is the synthesis process in design, where you reflect deeply on, what do I know? What do I care about? What is special about me? And how does that blend with the things I've learned from my target audience that allows me to really understand this problem better so I can ideate the next step of solution. Ideation it's not really like brainstorming. I'm not crazy about the brainstorm word, but it's kind of like looking for aha moments. Oh, wow, I never thought of that. What more can I think of? What am I not seeing here? What if I were a 4-year-old designing this? What if I were an 80-year-old designing this? What if I were a person with disabilities designing it? So you really challenge yourself to look both outside and inside to integrate this. That's synthesis and ideation. And then, of course, there's prototyping, testing, and the renewal. So yeah, the design process informs a lot of my thinking. Even before, I'm writing a talk right now that I'll give in Austria next month. And even before the first step was, who is my audience? What's on their minds? What are they worried about? What do they care about? What are their, how old are they? What are their fears as they look at the future of their life? What are their hopes and dreams? So that's empathy for them. Then I ask a few questions so I can confirm what really does matter, and then I can start synthesizing. This is kind of like that thing that I did when I was writing the story and I had that brain freeze and couldn't write for 3 days. Wow, I can bring that in. Then you prototype, test. That's the design thinking process. Let me add quickly, I always bookend design thinking with 2 things. I always put an intention at the beginning. What is the emotional state change I'm looking to create? And then at the end, I think about impact. How will I measure so that I know that either, it worked or didn't work and needs to be refined? Nihal, how are the leadership qualities of Steve different? Well, they were very different. And some people would say that, his leadership qualities were pretty, some people would say they were controversial. I made a decision a few years ago. I may be wrong about it. I have no way of knowing. But in learning about, talking with people who'd worked more closely with Steve than I had or known him for very long periods of time, people would come up to me and they would go, I couldn't stand Steve Jobs. I hated him. Or more usually they'd use a curse word when they said that. And I came to think that when people said that, it was their way of saying that Steve didn't approve of them or Steve didn't like them. And I would think, why? And again, I found some reason why these people were limiting themselves. They were self-limiters. So what they were doing is Steve would challenge them to get out of their comfort zone and rise to a higher iteration of themselves than they were, a higher vision of themselves than they were willing to see. And if they would not step up to that opportunity, he would not approve of them. And he would say, I can't take a risk on you. You're not willing enough to grow. My favorite story of this is from Johnny Ives. And Johnny was talking with one of the product designers on his team, and he goes, yeah, you're coming along, product looks pretty good. I think you could be a little better at this or that. And I really think, maybe go back and work and get this right and make it better. And good luck with that. And let me know if you need any help. I'm here to talk. And Steve came into him and said, never do that again. And Johnny goes, what do you mean? He goes, you didn't give him helpful information. He goes, sure, I did. I told him, try this, do this, and come back and talk to me if he needs help. He goes, Johnny, you're vain. And you wanted him to like you more than you wanted him to build an excellent product. And Johnny got really, really mad. And he said he went home fumed for 3 days. And then he went, oh my gosh, Steve was right. And Johnny said, I'm never going to do that again. So next time somebody came in, he goes, you've really missed the mark here. Look, you have the potential to work at the greatest athletic company in the world to create something extraordinary, and you're giving me mediocre. I want you to tell me 5 ways you're going to make this better by the next time we meet. And if that person was willing to grow, Johnny had given him an incredible gift, right? He had challenged him to awaken from the dream and step into his higher self. And that's what Steve did so well. So I'm a huge fan of Steve as a leader. And if again, I could go on and on about it, but there are many other questions. That's how I describe his leadership style. And he cared so much about his company and about the people in it. He said, you have a once-in-a-lifetime experience to do something extraordinary as a dreamer, as a designer, as a creator. You can't do anywhere else. And I am going to demand that you do your best work. And if you want evidence of it, look at the Apple campus, the new one. The amount of detail there shows how much Steve cared about his people. He created if I look at this from a neuroscience perspective, he created an environment with everything, and this is really important, anything that doesn't really matter simply slips away. If it doesn't matter, it disappears. So it doesn't distract you, and it frees your mind to do greater work. That's my take on him. Okay, and someone wrote to me, I hope we can meet in person when we come there. Alas, we can't. I'm spending June overseas. I will not be in the United States in June. I'm so sorry that I won't be able to meet you in person, but the good news is that's why we're having this talk. I'm going to come back to the question. I'm going to go through the questions in my Q&A first, as many as I can, and then I'll get back to the ones in the chat. Referring to law of attraction, how much do you believe in it? I've never studied the law of attraction. A lot of people talk to me about it. My path has been very different. I do look at physical reality. I do look at intentionality. I'm not in a good position. I know a lot of people believe in the law of attraction. I happen to believe that the book, The Secret, it shares some interesting spiritual things, but the best thing about it is the business model. It's a money-making machine for the people involved in it. So I have a little bit of skepticism for like that type of thing, but maybe I'm ignorant. I haven't really read it. There probably are parallels, but I don't talk about it. I guess I don't believe in the law of attraction because it takes a lot more than wishing for it. I think it takes visioning it, designing it, and pardon my French here, but working your ass off for it. Our opportunity in life is to work. The gift that we have is our ability to contribute our energy to something that we believe in. And I don't want to rub a magic lamp and hope that it comes to me. I want to chomp into it and work to see if I can make it happen. And if I can't make it happen, then the magic is something better will happen. And I want to have faith in that and live my life that way. So I think there's much more agency and self-accountability in it than the law of attraction. I demand a lot of myself and I have so much fun doing it, but that's the mindset that I live with. And it's a growth mindset or a discovery mindset, but it's also a joy mindset. I mean, we're lucky people to be able to work on things we care about with people we care about in a world that we care about. And to me, that's much more powerful than the law. I'm not slamming the law of attraction, but I don't know that much about it. So thank you for the question. Steve was neither a developer nor designer. The amount of fame that he got was more than the ones. Why? Because he started the company that let them design and develop and create greatness. He started it. He was the tip of the arrow that pointed it, shot it, and said, I'm going to bet everything on doing it. And he was also the person who said to those developers and designers, the greatest product in the world already exists. It simply exists in the future. And we have to move to it. And we're going to move there together and make it so that it becomes real. So I think he deserves to have all the fame for it. He had the audacity to drive it, open up the vision and say, I'm betting everything I have on building this dream. How do I think Steve Jobs handled his lack of coding knowledge to being the leader? Well, the first thing we have to know is back in the day when he started this company, right? Back in 1979 or 8 or whatever the year was, technology was built on a whole lot more than coding, right? These were hardware devices as well. So I want to really challenge you guys to say, we are pointing more and more inward on coding right now. Innovation is not only coding, right? It's thinking in a big way about what are the platforms, what are the opportunities, what are the needs, what are the vehicles that would deliver it. So Steve's paradigm for innovation was not limited to coding. Coding was absolutely one ingredient in the magical cake that he built, but it wasn't any different from any other ingredient. The packaging was as important to Steve as the coding. So remember, Steve's job was to vision, and that's your job too. It's not to code. I hope that landed. What are my best moments with Steve? Well, there are two. There are many. There are fewer than I wish, but I'll tell you there are two. And my two moments that matter the most to me are my first moment and my last moment. My first moment, I was 23 years old. I'd been at Apple for 4 weeks, and I was walking across campus, and I knew who Steve was. I'd seen him in talks, but all of a sudden I saw that we were walking toward each other, and our paths were going to cross. And I was young and had just come out of college and was in my first job and was in over my head, and had all of the questions and hopes and insecurities and imposter syndrome that every young person has, and sort of doesn't know what to do with. And there's the great Steve Jobs walking toward me, and when he got about 10 feet away, I felt his presence so profoundly I couldn't even walk. Like, I felt his energy, for lack of a better word. And nervously I said, he smiled at me with this like, yeah, whatever smile. And I said to him sort of nervously, "You're Steve Jobs, aren't you?" He goes, "I am. Who are you?" And he goes, "Who are you?" And I think he said, I can't be sure, but I like it. I like remembering that way. "Who are you and what do you do for me?" And he was like 4 years older than I was, but I told him what I did, and he, was nice and said welcome. And then we walked on. And I was very nervous for a long time afterward. So that was the first time. And then the last time I saw him was very, very shortly before he died. It was only a matter of weeks before he, stopped coming out in public. Maybe a month before. And I was at a supermarket, Whole Foods Market in Palo Alto, and I was shopping for my family, and I was reading the back of a cereal box of a new cereal that I hadn't seen before and was about to buy. I was reading the ingredient label to see, how much sugar was in it and it was healthy and stuff. And all of a sudden I looked to my left, and there on my left was Steve, and he was doing exactly the same thing. He was reading the back of a cereal box. And we looked at each other, and we hadn't known we were standing there. And we looked at each other, and we talked for a moment, and it was such a beautiful moment. And his smile as we said goodbye was, I'll never forget it. His light was so beautiful toward the end. And I know, it's sad to think about. And of course he suffered a lot, but he loved his life so much, and it showed on his face in that moment. We talked about buying cereal for our family and wanting our families to be healthy, and kind of joked for 2 minutes about that. But that was a very beautiful moment with Steve. There's some moments that are less private and much more visible, like when he first showed the Mac in a private auditorium. He first showed the Mac to employees for the very first time, and literally flew it long before the dawn of the drone, flew it over the auditorium, and his joy and light when he did that was really beautiful. But I have to say the private moments were really beautiful. What is it to be a great leader and founder like Steve Jobs? I hope I've answered that. I want to keep moving since we only have a little time. What made him different from the C-suite? Well, if that isn't clear right now, I haven't done my job. This is what I've learned from being entrepreneurs: humble, accepting your mistakes. Am I missing something important? Yeah. Well, first of all, we should always be asking, am I missing something important? We should ask ourselves that every day, because that's going to expand our comfort zone and get us out of our blind spots. So keep asking that question, no matter how many answers you get. There's a paradox here. The soon as we think we have expertise or have knowledge, the paradox is it shows how little we have. So make a commitment to never be an expert. Never allow yourself to be an expert. Always keep yourself a learner. So be humble, accept your mistakes. Yeah, care like crazy, and empower people to succeed, even if that means demanding people succeed. Did he create a reality distortion field? Heck yeah, he did. And so did I. And so can you. And I created it when I said by Friday, I want to know who can answer the question about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. And by Tuesday, I had more than the answer I'd asked for. So why don't you all give that a try too and let me know how it works for you? That is your power and your privilege. It's available to you as much as it was by Steve. Steve wasn't any different than any of us, except that he let himself do this stuff. Why don't you let yourself go ahead and try it too? What would Steve say about dispassionate people? Goodbye, go work somewhere else. What's your take on what Steve liked to call reality? There, I gave you an answer to that. How would you enhance on the design of the way we think? Oh, I love that question. Well, I think we can apply design thinking to all aspects of our lives. So I would say, look at the design process and apply it to how you think. What am I blind to? How can I have empathy for people that lets me understand a fuller set of opportunities or capabilities than I would think of myself? How can I create that? So how can I keep learning and learning and prototyping and doing better and doing better? That's applying design thinking to the way we think or to life. Oh, and by the way, you might want to Google, you guys, or I can share the link with Bharat, but in my Medium post, there's a really fun post that's about, it compares the Creative Nomad MP3 player to the iPad. And it's a pretty good case study in how design thinking changed a user experience. But I think there's some little breadcrumbs in there that can also be applicable to other things in life. So enhancing the design on the way we think, I would say, make questions the answers, always stay curious, and open your mind to a wide range of experiences so that it can integrate that with the knowledge that you have. Never define yourself only by your knowledge or your work. Define yourself by your curiosity, your wonder, your openness, and your willingness to get beyond your assumption set to learn to think different. What should we do to reach that enlightenment stage of design and product where we create wonders like Apple and, let's see, I think it continues, I guess, beyond? Keep trying, keep working, keep asking questions, get out of your assumptions, return to wonder. Wonder is the enlightenment stage. Wonder, what is possible here? And then always think, I'm not building a product, I'm building an experience or an emotional state change. And see your product as only the delivery vehicle that creates that emotional state change. A friend of mine says something that I'm going to type into the chat thing right now because you have to sort of see it. She says, business equals people plus people. Wait 1 second. Oh, here it is. Creating stuff. I'm doing it as she does it for other people, in which case the stuff is never as important as the people. So business equals people plus people making stuff for other people, in which and in no case is the stuff more important than the people. Think about the people. Design for the people on the other side of stuff. And you will be in a much more enlightened state of design and product where you create wonders like Apple or wonders like many other things that are beautiful things in the world, right? And then I would say, Sanket, do this, make sure you do this, is try to never reach that enlightenment stage. Because if you think it is reachable, you will never find the real enlightenment. Look at it as a paradox and become a little bit more enlightened every day by asking questions like, what was this one that was shown up above? The question, am I missing something important? Ask yourself that every day. And every day you'll take a tiny step in the direction of more enlightenment, and then hope in your life that no matter how long you live, that you never get there, that there's always a little bit more of that to find, right? Okay. Rather than experts in technology, should entrepreneurs be spiritual? Is this statement true? Well, I think we should all be integrated people. I think we should remember that we have more intelligence than simply that in our brains. Our brains are part of our intelligence, but they're not all of our intelligence. People knew that 3,000 years ago. They wrote about it in the Upanishads, right? There is more to us than meets the eye, and Steve believed that. And because he believed it and because he lived it, he was able to do extraordinary things. And that is available to all of us, to all of us. So why not try it for yourself? Expand your capacity every day through curiosity, through wonder, and be really mindful of the message we're getting from contemporary society and from the way we learn and from our, our love of science and tech. And I love science and tech, trust me. But that is not the only thing there is. We are more than code. We are more than computers. We are incredibly rich and complex beings of life, here to learn, here to experience, here to contribute. And let technology be one of the ways you do that, but do not limit yourself to that as a delivery vehicle. Steve didn't. You don't have to either. And the path to thinking different and the path to extraordinary impact is getting beyond those confines and into a higher state of what you contribute. And with that, I have to say thank you. And my time is up, and I hope this was useful to you.
Yes, Ellen, thank you so much. You have like almost answered around 15 questions, and that was so quick and so not so confusing as well. It was so great.
Good. Well, here it is. But real quickly, I want to say, you can tell that I care about this, can't you? I care. And when we care, everything changes. Our care is what fuels us to be our best selves in life and to be on the path to finding that. So I ask all of you, please remember that human part of you as you learn and master technology, because that is where your true gift will come from. And embody that so you inspire others to do the same. So thank you, Bharat.
Yeah. So on behalf of SV.co and the founders, the fellow founders who are with us, we want to thank you for joining us. I know your time is precious, but the way you responded and the way you thought let's teach this batch of SV.co was really grateful.
Good. It's my pleasure. And then I would encourage all in the batch to take the same philosophy. Make generous offerings to the world, and you will, by definition, be finding more joy and more return in it. Don't do it for the return, do it for the joy. But all kinds of great things will happen.
Great. Truly. So I'll also share the stories when kids travel to Silicon Valley, right? I'll definitely share some really great stories with you.
Very good. Very good. And have a wonderful, wonderful time. Open your eyes and look for surprises. Notice things that, other people might not notice. And I promise you will find things that will contribute to your experience here, even beyond the thing that you think you're here doing. I really say use it as an exercise to open yourself up to wonder.
Totally. Great advice. Thank you, Ellen.
Have a great time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.